Hi everyone, welcome back to this lecture on the problem of abstractness in phonological representations. So we've just seen that Spanish contrasts three different classes of verbs. Verbs of the, let's call it the negar type, which show alternations between a monophthong and a diphthong. Verbs of the pegar type, which show a monophthong consistently throughout, regardless of whether it's stressed or stressless. And verbs of the, let's call it the diezmar type, which show a diphthong throughout the paradigm, regardless of whether the diphthong is stressed or stressless. And the fact that both the monophthong or the diphthong can occur freely, regardless of their stress status, makes it impossible to simply derive the alternating type from either an underlying monophthong or an underlying diphthong. That is, regardless of which concrete surface allomorph for the verbal stem we were to choose, we would make incorrect predictions for one of these groups. I can label them as groups A, B, and C. So the fact that we have both these non-alternating diphthongal roots in example 2 here, and non-alternating monophthongal roots in example 1b here, leads us to try to posit an abstract method. So the basic idea of using the abstract method is that when we find an alternation between sounds A and B, in this case the alternation between sounds A, ye, and O, we, when we can't explain that alternation by choosing either underlying A or underlying B, then we choose some other sound C to be the underlying representation. And in principle, one could choose a completely abstract symbol. One could simply call the underlying representation for these vowels X and the underlying representation for these vowels Y, and state that the monophthong occurs when stressless, but the diphthong occurs when stressed. Of course, it would make more sense phonologically to assume that the abstract underlying representation here is nevertheless still phonologically relatively similar to the sounds that actually occur on the surface. And in fact, the analysis of these Spanish cases that you find in work by Harris follows the sort of diachronic basis for these patterns. So Harris, although Spanish synchronically only has 5 phonemic vowels, E, U, E, O, and A on the surface, the ancestor of Spanish, the Proto-Romance, had a 5-vowel system, as for instance in modern Standard Italian, which contains 2 mid-lax vowels, E and O. So the analysis of Harris is then to assume quite reasonably, yes, the non-alternating cases, types B and C, the verbal stems in those cases have precisely the underlying representations that we expect, since they are non-alternating. But the alternating cases instead have these lax mid-vowels that never occur as such on the surface. So the diphthong, the monophthong diphthong alternations would then have a lax vowel in the underlying representation. Oops. Neg. And if we take a case like contar, yeah. Let's add a case with O here. So we had first plural contamos alternating with cuento in the first singular. According to Harris's analysis, this stem should have the mid-vowel, mid-lax vowel, O. So once we have a completely different vowel here, now of course we are free to be able to posit rules to derive the sounds that actually occur on the surface, which will only apply to these vowels. And in that way, we won't have rules that accidentally affect, that ultimately have effects on forms that we don't want to affect. So Harris uses two rules here. So he uses a diphthongization rule, which states that the mid-lax vowels e and o become the diphthongs ye and we when they occur under the stress. So in terms of features, we can state that as follows. A vowel that is a mid-vowel, so minus high and minus low, and which is lax, so minus tense, and bears stress plus stress, turns into a sequence of a corresponding non-syllabic high tense segment. So that will give the glide ye or we. So the glide obtains necessary features from the underlying vowel for being a front vowel or a back rounded vowel. And there will be another vowel a, which is stressed, occurring after it. So if we take the underlying representation, let's see how this works in practice in the first singular forms. We'll use the verb contar in the first singular. Again, we first need to apply stress assignment. Again, ignoring exactly how stress is assigned in Spanish. So that will assign the primary stress to the first syllable. And now by the diphthongization rule, we now have a lax mid stressed vowel, which can undergo diphthongization. And by diphthongization, we then obtain niego and and cuento, just as we wanted. The further piece that we need is to ensure that we can derive the forms with the monophthong when there is no stress. And this is simply a general rule of vowel tensing, which states that that any vowel will become a tense vowel. And in order to make this as simple as possible, we'll have, so let's see in the first plural forms of the same verbs. Now, stress assignment will assign the primary stress to the second syllable without the lax mid-vowel. So diphthongization is not able to apply. And then finally, the vowel tensing rule, oops, we need a lax e there. The tensing rule will apply and turn any vowel into a tense vowel. There are, in principle, the vowel A is a target here and the vowel O, but the rule applies, we say it applies vacuously because it's able to apply, but it doesn't change anything. Whereas here, the application of the tensing rule will apply to those lax vowels, e and o, and transform them into a and o, respectively. In this case, we see that there's an important rule ordering between the diphthongization and the tensing processes, because what would have happened if tensing had applied first? Well, if tensing had applied first, then the underlying e and o in the first singular forms would have been transformed into a and o before diphthongization would have a chance to apply. So that in effect would, tensing in that case would have bled diphthongization. So this tells us that the actual rule ordering is a counterbleeding order. So it's a tensing counterbleeds diphthongization. Good. And you can fill in the same derivation at home. It's what we've just seen, that the tensing process has to follow the diphthongization process. Okay, so now that we've seen the basics of the abstract method in practice, we've seen a case in which we found that a pattern of alternation couldn't be unified with similar non-alternating patterns elsewhere in the data. We therefore chose a completely different underlying representation, and we tried to choose an underlying representation which was not too, we tried to choose a sound which was not so radically different, not so very different at all, from the actually occurring surface forms. And in that way, we could also minimize the complexity of the phonological rules that we write by writing phonological rules that don't have to change so many phonological features in order to derive the correct forms. So for instance, by assuming lax vowels that become the identical tense vowels, the corresponding tensing rule in order to derive the unstressed forms with tense vowels is then fairly simple. Okay, when we return, we'll try to look at deriving we'll try to look at working out another abstract analysis together on the basis of some Turkish data.